Welcome back to another episode of NFL News on the Boomer Bust channel. I'm your host, Terry, and today, not really news, but we're going to talk about Brock Purdy, a little bit of an editorial. Brock Purdy has had so much divisive conversation around him. And while that word might be a little bit overused, we are in divisive times. People like to cling to the 0 or the 100, the black or the white, the up or the down. And so this is, I think, a conversation that falls within that category. But why? Like, if you listen, there's a conversation that's been going since last year. All the national sports media outlets, if you listen to them, there's a discussion. Former players weigh in, everybody weighs in. Cam Newton's in the middle of a big debate now. So it is a very hotly debated topic. Obviously, the 49ers have made it to the Super Bowl, and that intensifies the conversation again. And so it seems that people are very polarized, either not only about what Brock Purdy is, but either some people feel he's being treated differently than other quarterbacks, and then there's people that feel like he's being treated just like everybody else. So how could both of those be true at the same time? And so with all this discussion, I just figured I'd jump on and kind of break it down. The reason that Brock Purdy is such a polarizing conversation exposes really the flaw in the modern sports media discussion. And there's a couple flaws, many flaws, but this is one of the main flaws, at least as in terms of football. Football is a team sport, and these quote unquote analysts and experts pick and choose when they want to approach it from the perspective of a team sport and when they want to approach it from the perspective of an individual. Now, as I've said on this channel many times, you cannot approach any of these discussions as an individual level because everything that you do is a product of the team. Like, maybe a team sport is a cliche and people don't quite know what that means, or they hear it so much that they don't think about it, but it is the objective truth. Everything you do is a product of a massive group of people, whether it's the 22 starters, the backups, whether it's the special teamers, whether it's the coaching staff, anybody. And so all of those pieces have to come together to make a product. However, because of whatever drives the direction of sports media, they feel that is more entertaining and that is more lucrative for them to talk about this in individual terms. And it might be right. I'm sure they're paying people, they're making money, people are still listening and everything. And so if you like to consume that type of surface level material, then you'll be fine with it. But to really get to the root of it, for those that might be curious or for those that look at football on a deeper level, this is the truth behind Purdy. And I would go on any platform, First Take, Undisputed, any of these, anybody, and I guarantee they would not be able to win a debate about this because it's just the truth. So the fact is, Brock Purdy, well, not Brock Purdy, but sports media analysts, they pick and choose when they want to talk about the team, and they when they want to talk about the individual. And so what that means is, especially when it comes to quarterbacks, we want to talk about them in a vacuum and what they do. A perfect example is Lamar Jackson. So if you're talking about Lamar Jackson for MVP, then it's, well, he doesn't have any great weapons. And he has Mark Andrews, who's not that great. Plus, he's been hurt and he's been able to do it without that. And he's still making everybody better. And he's still getting his team to win. and there's no discussion about, yeah, the numbers are low, but we're going to skip over that. Or he's getting short fields and turnovers, but we're going to skip over that. But now when you're talking about the Ravens in terms of who do you got going to the Super Bowl or who do you got in this matchup? Well, I'm going with the Ravens because they got the number one defense. Lamar's playing at MVP level. He's finally got some weapons. They upgraded the receivers. And so he's able to evolve his game to a different level than he used to be. So now you got a contradiction. This is why sports media is constantly contradicting itself. Because when you approach it from the perspective of the individual, at least in the way they do it, you have to put other people down. We have to create the narrative that downgrades everything around Lamar to prop him up and make him sound better. But when we're talking about it from the perspective of the team, well, then we can acknowledge all the pieces around that actually support. And so if you want to attack the individual argument, well, actually, I want to push back on that because Lamar isn't throwing a whole lot of yards. So you're arguing against the individual, they're going to respond with the team. He doesn't need a whole lot of yards. His defenses are keeping opponents below 20 points or whatever. They're giving him turnovers, so he's playing complementary football. So the rebuttal is about the team, but the argument is about the individual. And this is what creates sports media. You get to have this endless cycle of discussion because you're arguing two different things and you're not being completely factual about everything. So this is what's happening with Brock Purdy. Because the fact is, when you discuss a quarterback, the quarterback doesn't show up by himself. The quarterback shows up with everything around them. So we want to say Brock Purdy shows up with the 49, with a Kyle Shanahan, with a George Kittle, a Trent Williams, a C-Mac, Debo, Ayuk, whoever you want to name, you could keep naming them. He's showing up with them. So then the pushback is, well, if he doesn't have those things, he wouldn't be able to produce this. But when do we do that with other quarterbacks? When Patrick Mahomes was going on an MVP run his first year as a starter, no one said, oh, well, he wouldn't be doing this without Kittle and Tyreek Hill. When Josh Allen is doing his thing, no one's like, well, that's only because he has Stephon Diggs. He's not a threat otherwise besides that. No one does these things. I mean, obviously in small conversations, but at large, that's not the conversation for everyone. And I'm not saying Purdy's the only one. It depends, especially as a Bears fan with Justin Fields. I know it depends. As I've always said, with narratives, it depends on who you're rooting for so you can change the narrative and approach it a certain way. Skip Bayless is the king of this. Depending on who he's trying to support and what narrative he's trying to push, he's going to approach it from one way or the other. But the truth is, the fact is, and I've said many times, to compare a quarterback, especially any player, but especially a quarterback, there's only two ways to really compare them. Either you can talk about, hypothetically, what if they switched? So you're telling me Pat Mahomes is better than Josh Allen. Well, put Mahomes on the Bills. Does he produce the same as Josh, worse, or better? If Josh goes to the Chiefs, does he produce the same, worse, or better? The other way is a draft. Now, in the NFL draft, it's slightly similar because the teams are going through and saying what's best for my situation between a number of options. But if you had a complete fantasy draft, you don't know what the team is going to look like. So when you pick a quarterback, And we all assume Mahomes would be the number one pick if we did a fantasy draft, like a legit redraft of the NFL, not a fantasy football. We assume Mahomes would be the number one pick. But you have to make that pick assuming and knowing because of his skill set, no matter what we end up with as a team, he's going to be successful. And so those are really the only two ways to talk about it. Because again, and I heard Nick Wright, I'll shout out him and I always praise him because I think he's on the right track. He's not a perfect analyst, but he's on the right track with assessment. When he mentioned this the other day, he said if the league was doing a draft where you don't, or he said actually it was a little different. He said if you did a draft where you don't know what team you're going to have, which is essentially the same thing as a fantasy draft, how many people would pick Brock Purdy before, these other quarterbacks? And that really is, a question. That's the individual level. That's the individual technique. That's the individual physical traits, all of those things. And which is why I said the NFL draft is kind of close to it because you're only evaluated really on your individual ability. But in the NFL draft, you get to fit that into the context. If I'm the Bears, I get to look at Caleb Williams and says, how does that fit with exactly the roster we have right now? But if you did a blind, fantasy redraft and you don't know who's on your team, you have to evaluate purely on the individual talent. And so if you want to have that individual discussion, then there's a discussion about where Purdy might fall. But whenever you bring that up, a lot of the people will push back and say, I'm not talking about hypotheticals. I'm not talking about what could be. I'm talking about what is. But these are the same people then turn around and say, well, if Debo is hurt, well, if Trent Williams wasn't there, well, if C-Mac then make this run for him, so you contradicting yourself again. And this is, again, I'm telling you really break down the rhetoric of sports media, that is where all the problems lie. You are trying to force an individual discussion in a pure team sport. NBA is a team sport. There's 5 players on the team, but guess what? They play both ways. And it's only 5. You can make a bigger impact than a team with 11 people on the field who only play one side of the ball. So football is a pure team sport. Brock Purdy's not showing up alone to play the Chiefs defense. Brock Purdy is showing up with Trent Williams and all those other guys. And Shanahan is his play caller. So when you don't qualify the debate, like if you go to an actual debate, like an organized one, they would never have a vague, nebulous topic. It's going to be specific. But in sports media, it's so vague and nebulous. So I'm going to attack it from the individual level. And so you get a instance where both people could be right in a certain circumstance. And to be honest, that's probably what they want. That's probably what the producers and the marketers want. They want them where you could go back and forth, not realizing you're not even arguing the same thing. And that is why Brock Purdy is such a polarizing topic. Because if, again, you're talking about individual skill, you're breaking him down as a prospect. No matter where I put him, what is Brock Purdy? He's going to be ranked a certain way. Versus when you're taking a team. Like, if you ask me, would I take Patrick Mahomes and what he has, because it's never that, it's just Patrick Mahomes. Would I take Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs versus Josh Allen and the Bills? Okay, that's one question. Now, let's just say that Josh Allen, or let's just say the Bills trade and get Tyreek Hill and Diggs. So they got Diggs and Tyreek Hill. That's a different question. Not because Josh Allen changed, but because what is around him changed. So when we're talking about ranking and everything, in its true form, you're talking about the team. It's not just Brock Purdy shows up by himself. It is Brock Purdy in the team he has. So again, people will say he has C-Mac. He has it. Well, what if he doesn't? Well, what if he doesn't? Now we're talking about two different things. And again, I think a lot of it's on purpose, but that is why the Brock Purdy conversation is so polarizing. And for my own thoughts, to put my 2 cents in, I think that on an individual level, the thing is, if you listen to this channel, and I'm a draft guy, I think Brock Purdy has a certain skill set that is probably above average. But once you add confidence and he's gained confidence, you can grow and get better at what you're doing. And then obviously the context matters, but just individually you can get better. So I didn't look at Brock Purdy coming out of the draft, but watching him, what he's been able to do, especially from last year to this year, again, I would say skill set wise, he's probably 15 to 20 in the league, somewhere around there. Maybe, yeah, somewhere 15 to 25. When you're talking about Brock Purdy with the Niners and given his situation, he's easily a top 8 quarterback. And that's really the truth. But wrapping that conversation up that fast doesn't help any of these networks make money. So that's why we keep going around in circles. But that's it for me. Go to the comment section. Let me know what you think about Brock Purdy. Share it around. Subscribe. Thumbs up. Get the conversation started. And thank you for listening.